You're listening to dialectradio.co.uk.
Right, I'm joined on the line now from Maine, which is part of New England. That's on the east coast of the United States, above New York, above Boston, by Bruce Gagnon. Hi, Bruce, and welcome to Dialect.
Howdy, nice to be with you.
Now, Bruce, tell us a bit about your organisation. It's called GNAWNPIS, I think, but actually spell that out for us.
It's called the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. It was created in 1992 to build a consciousness and ultimately a constituency around the world to begin to try to deal with this coming reality of U.S. space domination. At the Space Command headquarters in Colorado Springs, above their doorway, they have their logo that reads Master of Space. And in a planning document some years ago, they talked about how with space technology, the U.S. would control the Earth below, basically on behalf of corporate capitalism.
Okay, well, tell us what's up there. What do we know about what's up there at the moment?
Well, what's up there today is a slew of military satellites that direct all warfare on the planet, so the U.S. can see everything, can hear everything, and can target every place on the Earth below. And with that technology, they now have an advantage over every other country. They can direct soldiers on the ground, people in tanks, people in planes, people on boats to their targets with this military space technology.
But, I mean, surely the Chinese, the Russians, they've got their satellites up there too. There's no, the Americans might want to dominate space, but they don't have a monopoly up there.
No, they don't, but they sure have a tremendous advantage. And now the United States is deploying so-called missile defense systems encircling both Russia and China. And missile defense is a key element in U.S. first strike attack planning. The idea is that you would hit them first in a first strike attack when they tried to fire their remaining retaliatory capability. So-called missile defense systems would take them out. So the U.S. formally was involved with Russia in the ABM Treaty, anti-ballistic missile treaty, that excluded and disallowed, outlawed these so-called missile defense systems. But when George W. Bush became president, he walked away from that treaty. And since that time, Obama has escalated the program dramatically. And we now see today both Russia and China saying that all negotiations for nuclear disarmament are off as long as the U.S. continues surrounding both those countries with missile defense.
But that's on the ground, the missile defense system. What's the connection with what's going on up way above the Earth?
Well, missile defense doesn't work unless you have satellites that can direct it to its target, unless you have ground stations like up at Fylingdales and Menwith Hill, Yorkshire, that can direct it to its target. So all of this space technology fits together into a seamless web. And again, the United States is far along, much further along than anyone else. There are really no competitors to the U.S. today. And the U.S. has demonstrated in the past that it has anti-satellite weapons capability, the ability to destroy other countries' satellites, and also leads today in cyber warfare, which allows essentially the U.S. to try to shut off other countries' computers before they're attacked, so that they're not able to have their early warning systems in place, so they don't see the U.S. coming. This is what the U.S. did in Yugoslavia just some years ago.
So what did they do in Yugoslavia, Bruce?
They shut down the air defense system, so they were not able to protect themselves when NATO warplanes bombed Yugoslavia. Not one NATO warplane was lost in that so-called war. So clearly the advantage of cyber warfare there gave the U.S. and NATO a clear ability to play cat and mouse, if you will.
So what about the shooting down of satellites or disabling them? How is that done? Is it done from other satellites or from the ground?
Well, right now they have the ability to do it from the ground, but they also are putting in place systems like the X-37B, a military space plane that has demonstrated it has the ability to stay in orbit for a year at a time. And it would be able to go up and essentially wipe out another country's satellite while it's orbiting the Earth.
Is there any likelihood of that happening? I mean, surely most of the satellites are actually not used for military purposes. They're used for simple things like sat-navs, for things like satellite phones, and for communications around the world, for peaceful things.
Well, actually, most satellites are dual purpose. They have a civilian purpose, but they also have a military purpose. And so the majority of satellites in orbit today function on some level, some military purpose.
Is it possible to sort of go around, get on with your day without being observed by satellites?
If the U.S. wants to observe you, they have the ability to do so. If they want to target you, as we see with drones, for example, they have the ability to do so. They really have the ability to intercept all phone, fax, and email communications worldwide now, with ground stations like Menwith Hill that plays that role, and U.S. ground stations in other countries like in Germany and Australia and many others around the world.
The only trouble is, Bruce, they better cross their fingers and hope that it's not a cloudy day, otherwise the satellite can't see anything.
Well, I think that you'd find that they've developed the ability to see through clouds. They have very highly advanced technologies these days that are doing those kind of functions on a regular basis.
What are you actually able to do, Bruce, at all? Because ultimately you can't stop the US domination of space, can you? In fact, I seem to remember there's one of the slogans is total information awareness, and obviously that's what they want. They want to dominate space, and they want to be aware of everything that's going on and everyone's personal data.
Well, as Noam Chomsky often says, how can you expect the American people or any people around the world to do anything about these issues when they don't know much about it? So that's our number one job in the global network, is to make sure the public begins to understand the complexity and the sheer cost. The Pentagon brags that this whole, what we call Star Wars program, will be the largest industrial project in the history of the planet Earth. Where while I was recently in your country, I saw a headline in one of these free newspapers that I picked up at the University of London that talked about massive expenditures that the British government is planning to spend on space technology. And where are they going to get the money in times of austerity? Well, it only will come from increased human services cuts in all of our countries. So this is the program today of the military-industrial complex to use very expensive space technology to try to control the world on behalf of corporate interests. But again, this is going to be very expensive. This is ultimately the Achilles heel of the Star Wars program, the sheer cost. Every time you build a satellite, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. You launch the satellite on rockets that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to launch. And then now and then it blows up and they have to start all over again. So it's a very expensive game, and it's very expensive to keep the satellites and downlink stations all over the planet that relay the messages and communicate with the satellites and make this whole thing happen. So the cost is the issue. And the way we're going to end up defeating it in the end is by rallying people around the world to defend social progress and not to allow the corporations to raid our national treasuries to build these space technologies that ultimately only benefit those that want to extract resources around the world, control markets, and control governments on behalf of corporate globalization.
You're not going to do that, Bruce, are you? Because people will rely on their sat-navs now. We need these satellites.
Well, shows like yours help us reach people, right?
I wonder if you could recommend any, because it's quite easy nowadays to go on to the internet to find a good documentary that explains some of this, which has got some of the detail. Particularly people who are interested in science want to know what is going on. So are there any places that you could recommend, or particular films to people who can get clued up on satellites?
Well, I think the first place to go is our website, spaceforpeace.org, spaceforpeace.org. And on the website, we have a video section where we have links to many, many videos, but two that I would highly suggest. One is called Arsenal of Hypocrisy, and the other is called Pax Americana and the Weaponization of Space. So Arsenal of Hypocrisy and Pax Americana and the Weaponization of Space, they're both also available on YouTube.
Now, I know you were over in Britain. You mentioned that at London University, up at Menwith Hill as well. This is up in North Yorkshire. I can remember I went to college up there, and from out of our library window in Ilkley, you could see across the North Yorkshire moors to a whole collection of these white golf balls, we used to call them, about 10 miles away from our college. And this has always been a bit of a mysterious place. It was first, certainly to my knowledge, looked into for the British people by the journalist Duncan Campbell in the 1980s, and he made a series which included looking at it called Secret Society, which actually got the Director General of the BBC sacked when that was shown. Obviously a very sensitive place, but what goes on? What's Menwith Hill all about, Bruce?
It has two basic functions. The first is it's an NSA, the National Security Administration, a National Security Agency, rather. It's a spy base, spying on the people of Britain and throughout Europe, and also doing industrial espionage on behalf of U.S. corporations. And then secondly, its role is to participate in this so-called missile defense program, relaying information from satellites that will be put in place that will help the targeting of missile defense systems and U.S. first strike attack on Russia and China. Also, there's Fylingdales also up in the Yorkshire moors that is a X-band radar base that is also highly involved in the U.S. missile defense program. And then a third place that I visited while I was there was down near Oxford. It's Croughton, another U.S. base called an RAF base, but it's not. It's a U.S. Space warfare communications relay base, and they're building more and more golf balls there all the time. And so peace groups out of the Oxford area protest there regularly.
Where is all this heading? Because we've got this thing called the global war on terror at the moment, possible conflict with the Russians, particularly either in Syria or in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, maybe even the Baltics. So it doesn't look as if war is off the agenda, Bruce.
No, I think the United States' goal is to take Russia down and take China down. Recently, I saw a speech by George Friedman, the founder and chief executive officer of Stratfor, which is the sort of the privatized CIA. They brief private corporations, give them intelligence information. He called for the taking down of both Moscow and Beijing. Why Russia? Why take down Russia? Well, because they have the world's largest supply of natural gas. And don't we know by now that the Pentagon's number one job in the world is to serve as the primary resource extraction service for corporate globalization? And then secondly, as we see climate change, we see the melting of the Arctic ice. What country has the largest land border with the Arctic Ocean? Well, that happens to be Russia. And the oil corporations want to get up into the Arctic and drill, baby, drill. And so according to Friedman and also the Rand Corporation in California, that's a long-known military think tank, the idea is to balkanize Russia, break it up into constituent pieces so that they would have an easier chance to then get in and extract resources, both on the ground and from the Arctic Sea in the coming years. So this is the project. And so they're starting with, they started with Libya. Libya has the largest supply of gas on the African continent. U.S. and NATO took down Libya. Now they're trying to take down Syria. Iran is on the agenda, and then Russia. And then, as I said, China as well. So today we see a NATO expansion on steroids creeping up to the Russian border, violating promises that were made to the former Soviet Union when the Berlin Wall fell, that NATO would not expand 1 centimeter to the east. But Bill Clinton and a succession of U.S. presidents have violated that promise. So Russia today is looking at the Earth from their space satellites, and they see themselves being surrounded, as does China. And I believe that this current situation in Syria and the Turkish shooting down of a Russian airplane is one more effort on the part of NATO to create a war with Russia.
But, I mean, are they crazy, Bruce? Because, I mean, a nuclear war it would be if it was with Russia and China.
I believe they are crazy, in fact. The people that control the United States government today are not the citizens of the United States, but in fact, it's a criminal syndicate, a corporate criminal syndicate full of psychotic operatives that work for corporations that are blind to human suffering. And we've seen what they've done in Iraq. We've seen what they've done in Afghanistan. We've seen what they've been doing in eastern Ukraine, where the Kiev junta, the puppet government in Kiev, controlled by the United States, has been shelling their own citizens, killing thousands of them, innocent people. So, we've seen what the U.S. government has been doing in Syria. We've seen what they do with drones in many different countries, killing scores and scores and scores of innocent people. So clearly, my government is out of control, and anybody that misses that is not really paying attention.
What are the American people doing to sort out their own government, Bruce?
I think they're very depressed. They're very saddened, and sadly, too, they're also many of them are under the control of the corporate-dominated media, just as in your country, where you have a scandalous media that is run by the likes of Rupert Murdoch. Our media is also run by corporate interests who keep people distracted with entertainment and hysterical fear-mongering stories. So that's the reality of our country. We do have a peace movement that has been largely demobilized by the Obama administration. The liberal Democrats in this country are afraid to speak out against their own president for fear that he would be replaced by someone worse. But in fact, it's my opinion that Obama has done the very same things that George W. Bush was doing, in fact, even worse, but at the same time offered the corporate oligarchy that runs our country the added advantage of having demobilized much of the left. So this is where we are today. And those of us that still remain active in the peace movement are scrambling, trying to do our best under a difficult situation.
Bruce, just remind us about where your website is, where people can follow some of your work online. And I'd also like to know, actually, maybe before you answer that, what role do you think these sorts of attacks like the 9/11, the 7/7, London bombings and the Paris attacks have in all of this?
Well, I've become a student in the last year or so of the whole Gladio operation after World War II, the U.S. NATO operation to create terrorist incidents throughout Europe as a way to blame them on the left to keep socialists and communists out of power. In fact, if you go onto YouTube and just Google BBC documentary Gladio, Gladio, you see a wonderful BBC story that unearths the whole Gladio operation. So I think that what we saw in Paris, what would happen on 9/11, are these Gladio-style false flags. There's no doubt in my mind about it. I would suggest people, again, go to our website, spaceforpeace.org. That's the global network against weapons and nuclear power in space. And also I have a blog that I post to pretty much every day, especially when I'm traveling. I want people to know what I'm doing around the world. And that is called Organizing Notes. And you can find it from our website, spaceforpeace.org, or just Google Organizing Notes along with my name, Bruce Gagnon, and you should find it.
Well, Bruce, from the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. We didn't really get around to talking about nuclear power in space. That sounds a bit frightening. But anyway, maybe we'll do that another time. Thanks very much for joining us on Dialect.
Thank you, Tony.
That's all for this week. Dialect's Bristol's first weekly MP3 podcast, broadcast on community radio stations in Bristol, Swindon, Preston and St Albans in the past. At the moment, we've been suspended until next spring from BCFM in Bristol. If you're online, you can subscribe to our emails or download the podcast from dialectradio.oneword.co.uk. Thanks to our guest this week, Cleo Lake, Director of St Paul's Carnival, the poet Lawrence Hu, and Bruce Gagnon, you just heard there, from Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, his website spaceforpeace.org. Dialect's produced by volunteers. We're online at dialectradio.oneword.co.uk. And if you want to join in, contact Volunteering Bristol, just off Queen's Square. Call them on 0117 989 7733 or visit them on the web at bristolvolunteers.org.uk. That was Dialect, and I'm Tony Gosling, wishing you a very good week. Thanks for listening. Till the same time next week, goodbye for now.